Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Sonic the Hedgehog here.
And I am Amy Rose here, and we are back for the likes of the Mexi Toys videos.
And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more of Let's Play of Sonic Boom, Rise of Lyric. In some cases, I hate this game so much, for the Nintendo Wii U, and only for the Wii U. So, last time, we essentially did manage to explore into Lyric's tomb, and managed able to discover the forms of, without doubt, is the most forgettable villains of all time, which is of course Lyric himself, and overall, with the forms of the Lyric's tomb in mind, that particular first level was actually a piece of cake, despite the fact of how simplistic it looks. So either way, today for this video is about the fact that we're going to be continuing things on and move on to the forms of, I would say, we're about to be able to explore into the first hub world in the game. So as a result, similar to the forms of how it does it in the majority of the Sonic games, from Sonic Adventure 1, Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, Sonic Unleashed, specifically on the Xbox 360/PlayStation 3, that basically though is about the fact that we can able to run around in a hub world, so naturally speaking, you can able to actually double check on not only certain items you can able to find, and on top of that, there's going to be some side quests involved, similar to the forms of how it does it in, let's just say the town missions from Sonic 06, except the fact that obviously though is about the fact that, well, I will have to admit though right away, this is not going to be a 100% playthrough of the game, mainly because no matter what though, I was expecting to try to test out, certain side quests I would like to tackle through, but as a result, I just somehow forget everything about it, because as a result, well, I will admit though, it looks visually appealing, but it's also very spacious, and it's also completely lifeless at times, which is especially noticeable during at some point in the later half in the game, which as a result, you probably get the idea of what I was expecting to be able to explain about this. So, anyway, so as you can tell about the fact that since we're now onto the first hub world in the game, unfortunately though, we have to run a lot slower, so as a result, and yes, there might be a couple of times though, like I said before, about the fact that the frame rate will sometimes choke, and during at some point in journey forms of not only for certain sections, but it's especially noticeable whenever we get to the forms of the later marked speed sections here and there. So, relatively speaking though, it is still unpleasant to see, with certain frame rates did manage to stutter for a bit, and not to mention though, similar to the forms of how it does it in the Nintendo Switch version of Sonic Frontiers, and that something tells me about the fact that we will come across into a random pop-up, so usually for the draw distance potentially. So because of that though, so it looks like no matter what though, we're about to try to able to actually find this NPC character called Cliff. Although, mind you, about the fact that this particular game, as far as the actual storytelling is concerned, is actually by the forms of a prequel to the TV series, which obviously, like I said before, is like licensed Sonic games based off of a TV series, based off of, well, obviously a well-known video game franchise. So, yeah, as a result, yeah, although, unfortunately though, is about the fact that we will come across into that similar situation as the forms of Sonic 06, which as a result, then again, we'll talk more about that and during at some point in a later time. So, yeah, that's as far as I can able to try to explain about this for this point, Sonic, but either way. So yeah, a few things we want to talk about is for the sake of time, and that's what appears to be about the fact that, well, today's date of course there is the 29th of May today, in some cases in 2024 today, so naturally speaking though, it's about the fact that we've only got about 3 more days to go, until we move on to June. So I'm basically super excited about the forms of next month still, especially concerning for the fact that, and it's also worth noting for, is that until tomorrow, that tomorrow's case will be the celebration for the 10th anniversary of the game's release of Mario Kart 8, specifically on the Wii U version, which as a result, then again, it's probably best if we let Tiana will mention more about it, if assuming of course about the fact that she will definitely going to be coming back onto playing through Princess Peach Showtime for a while, so just to ensure for the fact that we can able to guarantee to able to actually mention some brief amount of stuff as much as possible, but either way, so let's just go ahead and slowly fly descent, and exponentially we'll find not only for this very strange pillar, but it's also about the fact that we somehow come across into Cliff right here, so let's talk to him.
Cliff! Thank goodness we found you! Can't say I know much. Oh, but I do know about an ancient prison with a giant snake in it.
Well, how about you tell us about that one?
The snake's name is Lyric, and he was locked away to prevent him from destroying all life in the world. He's the last surviving member of a long-lost civilization called the Ancients. They harvested all the energy they needed from powerful crystals. Despite their advanced technology, the Ancients lived in perfect harmony with nature, except for Lyric, who schemed to steal the crystals and use them to power an army of machines. When the Ancients found out, they imprisoned him. He's an evil, ruthless, dangerous, pitiless, remorseless monster. Thank goodness he's locked up for all eternity.
Yeah, funny story. Might have accidentally unleashed him on the world.
Not cool, Sonic. But you might still be able to stop him. Lyric needs those crystals to reboot his army. His first move will be to go after them. You gotta get him first.
How do we find him?
If that prison is still functioning, there must be a crystal nearby. And that's a good place to start. If you have any other questions, my buddy Quincy here can answer them.
What if I have questions? Let's get
So, no matter what, we have to enter in the mines.
So as a result, our next objective we're about to take care of, and that's what appears to be about the fact that I believe Cliff did somehow mention this plot MacGuffin collectibles are called the Power Crystals, or specifically Chaos Crystals, which is basically this game's equivalent to Chaos Emeralds, except the fact that obviously though, unlike the regular Chaos Emeralds, including Soul Emeralds, as well as the 7 World Rings in Sonic and the Secret Rings, I don't think there's a possibility we can able to turn into a super form, or should I say with the forms of not only with Super Sonic, as well as the forms of Dark Spine Sonic, and on top of all that stuff though with Burning Blaze, despite the fact that, well, Blaze the Cat is not going to be featured in the Sonic Boom community, alongside with the forms of Silver the Hedgehog as well, which that could have given me the forms of a huge opportunity to able to actually interested with the forms of this entire series, but like I said before, since enjoying the forms of on Monday, the series only lasted for about 3 years, so as a result, generally speaking though, is about the fact that, technically speaking though, that did you know about the fact that there was actually a teaser trailer for this game back in during the forms of in, I would say, since the very beginning of 2014, just right before E3 2014 exists, and originally though, this game was going to be originally trying to call it Sonic Century, I think it's what it says anyway. And relatively speaking, I was about the fact that it's like an alpha version of this game right here. And what I've managed able to look upon it while looking back on it though, that despite the fact that my first impressions when it comes to the forms of this game's first announcement is not that very impressive for me. Especially concerning for the fact that obviously though, if I've looked back on the forms of the very first trailer of the game, that it does look a bit rough around the edges when it comes to certain character models. And not only that though, Sonic, it's about the fact that, from what I can tell, the actual game's lighting is actually way better than the forms of how it does on the final product. Or specifically though, Amy, the final version of the game. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that, again, we'll talk more about that specific stuff once we get to the later sections in journey forms of this whole game. So either way. And of course, every once in a while though, is about the fact that we might be able to come across into certain secret rooms, which as a result, like for instance, if we go into this particular cave right here, not only does it grant you to give you some more rings, as well as the forms of some more robot scrap metal, thanks to the forms of that treasure chest that we did somehow opened up. So, generally speaking, I was about the fact that what these scrap metals are used for, well, that again, we'll point things out as soon as we're able to actually obtain the first Chaos Crystal. So, because of that, though, so as you can tell, we somehow immediately onto this dash pad right here, and as a result, we need to able to find the Shock Crystal. So, because of that, though, and as far as I'm aware, I think this is the point I was actually on about when it comes to the forms of utilizing with the forms of scrap metal. Well, if you couldn't tell, every time whenever you do manage to stumble across into ourselves with these little sign construction bits right here, that if you go near to this particular construction sign bit, basically the game tells you about the fact that you need to spend quite a larger amount of those scrap metal. So just to ensure for the fact that not only you get certain collectibles, like for instance the crown right here, and on top of all that stuff though is about the fact that maybe some other items as well. But then again though, this is not going to be a 400% playthrough, I'm afraid, guys, just because no matter what though, I totally you know, forgot about the forms of specific items. Since enjoying the forms within the first level in the game, well, this is clearly because I don't usually care for this game all that much, especially concerning for the fact that, well, as far as you probably already know, that this game is basically, it's like the second worst Sonic games ever made, next to the forms of Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, Sonic Free Riders, specifically with the Kinect feature, and on top of that, Sonic Labyrinth, Sonic Blast for the Game Gear, and on top of that, Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1, with all this particular rehash, nostalgia tone to it, and on top of that, the physics is way off in Episode 1, whilst thankfully in Episode 2 did manage to fix that issue, but then again, we'll talk more about that once we get around on doing our redo Let's Play of Sonic the Hedgehog 4 as a whole. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that, as you can tell, that despite the fact that we can't show you anything on the forms of our Wii U gamepad capture footage, so as a result, if you couldn't tell already, we did somehow manage to able to activate this particular interesting feature, and that's what allows us to able to scan through hidden areas that you can able to actually just break certain walls. Something very similar to the forms of how it does in one of those games called Batman Arkham City or something, or specifically Batman Arkham Origins or Arkham games in general, like basically those about the fact that there is actually the forms of the actual detective mode, where basically though you can able to actually scan specific breakable walls and all that stuff, which, yeah, it's kind of like that, except the fact that you are totally in complete standstill, and not to mention though is about the fact that technically, for what I've noticed, is that not only you can able to actually take control with the actual camera controls with that particular detective mode, not just by the forms of the right analog stick, but also if what I can gather, that it does manage to feature a gyro sensing controls. So yeah, I was not expecting that, didn't it?
Yeah, despite the fact that we rarely use that sometimes, apart from the fact that just trying to able to actually just to see what's up ahead and stuff like that. So as you can tell, we somehow obtained the first crystal. So because of that though, now we need to return back to Cliff. And something tells me about the fact that before we're able to actually meet up with Cliff again, I believe we have to able to actually do this mandatory quest until we're able to actually continue our progressioning for the sake of this whole entire story. So yeah, we got able to deal with this a lot, by the way, for take control of different playable characters, I'm pretty sure.
Come on, guys, this way.
The mine collapsed! The miners are trapped! Can you help me save them? Please save them!
Okay there, fella, calm down. We are heroes, so obviously we can and will help. We're a pretty big deal.
Thank you, thank you, thank you!
Because, yeah, believe me, what I'm saying for this point, Amy, is about the fact that there are a couple of times, though, about the fact that we have to force to able to take control of 2 characters at a time for one of those sections in particular, whilst meanwhile we can't able to actually take control of Sonic and Tails from now on, so we have to able to force to able to actually go into this particular part before we're able to actually continue our story progressioning. So, because of that, though,
yeah, you probably get the idea of how this is gonna turn out to be. So anyway, and as far as I'm usually concerned with this point right here, is about the fact that, did you guys know that in the Japanese version of Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric, does able to actually have ourselves a different name on the Japanese version?
and yes, as a result, the game is actually called Sonic Toon Ancient Treasure in the Japanese version. So because of that, and for those of you probably wondering what Sonic Toon stands for on the Japanese version, basically though is basically the Japanese version of Sonic Boom, but with dubbed in Japanese voices. So despite the fact that you might able to actually still see the actual English lip syncing during the films of the actual TV show as far as this is concerned, so that begs the question for that. So even though I will admit though, Amy, is about the fact that I haven't exactly watched that much of the Japanese version of Sonic Toon.
Or don't you mean Sonic Boom?
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to be thinking about anyway. But I will say is about the fact that the voice cast, not only for the sake of the forms of this game, as well as the forms of Shadow Crystal, and finally Fire and Ice, is easily the best aspect about the forms of those 3 games in my opinion. I mean, sure, no matter what though, the writing itself is a little bit too cringe-worthy for my taste, especially concerning for the fact that one thing you might able to actually realize that every time whenever you do manage to achieve something, likely also if you're trying to able to actually just do, you know, not only collecting certain rings, but also if you're trying to able to actually activate the boost pad, or for that matter though, you can able to activate certain switches, and on top of that, the bounce pad. And basically, every single characters, mainly with Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy, are talking a lot throughout the majority of current situations you're able to actually come across into. And believe me, what I'm saying is, it's actually getting really repetitive very fast, especially concerning for the fact that if we go on to later sections, my goodness, it will be pretty repetitive, like I said before. Although, this is especially noticeable concerning for the fact that if we go on to a Mike Speed section again, obviously though about the fact that we might able to actually hear the exact same character dialogues in between, but either way, despite the fact that it's been about 2 days ago since we've last played this game for sure, because like I said before, it's about the fact I'm pretty sure that Tiana, she's almost finishing up everything for the sake of the forms of Princess Peach Showtime before we move on to the next batch of Let's Plays coming up, for hopefully by that time we're able to actually just to hear more about when it comes to the forms of the upcoming Nintendo Direct for the sake of the forms of in June. So, but anyway, and there's also another thing is worth noting for, is about the fact that technically speaking though, you can able to actually mute the forms of the character voices. However, it's only apparent whenever you're trying to get into the actual gameplay itself, whilst compared to the forms of how it does it on the regular cutscenes, that are obviously though, the character voices are basically not muted. So because of that though, yeah, you probably get the idea of how this is gonna turn out to be. So either way, and relatively speaking though, is about the fact that, like I said before, that it's a good thing we did not get this game back in the day on day 1, because as a result, I can imagine about the fact that if we're trying to get this game in day 1, my god, we are totally going to be ripped off, despite the fact that back in the day, that basically though, this game is incredibly buggy, and on top of all that stuff though, like I said before, it's unpolished, and I don't feel like trying to able to explain about that again, but that's just mainly because no matter what though, there are some other explanations I would like to point out, and that's what appears to be about the fact that, well, you probably already know about the fact that recently that Stuart, or in some cases CapKing74, that he's obviously continued playing through Kirby Squeak Squad, or specifically Kirby Mouse Attack, for those of you who lived in the UK countries, so to speak, and unfortunately though, he does manage to able to come across into himself the forms of this technical issue, specifically when it comes to commentary in mind, and as far as I'm usually concerned. Now, from what I can gather, I did manage to able to test out with the forms of the built-in laptop's microphone, and as a result, no matter what though, it does not sound great, especially concerning for the fact that from what I can gather, that basically we still have ourselves the second-hand condition for that particular HP laptop. So because of that though, it's a good thing we still managed able to have ourselves with that particular microphone stand still, since in Journey forms have been 2020, so geez, I can't even believe we had that particular microphone since likely for 4 years or so, which is pretty unbelievable if you ask me. Yeah, despite its flaws for the sake of the forms of certain USB connections, but apart from those side things though, it does manage to work just fine. Yeah, exactly. So, although originally though, we were expecting to try to able to invite Tails, Knuckles, as well as Shadow, and stay players with Silver as well, but suffice to say though, I don't suppose that both Tails and Knuckles and Shadow and Silver are not going to be interested with this game, because it's especially noticeable because, like I said before, that Silver the Hedgehog alongside with Blaze the Cat was not appeared in the Sonic Boom series. So the only time it does make an appearance for certain characters though, well, spoiler alert for those you have not seen, not just by the forms of Season 1, but as well as Season 2 as well, that basically it does manage able to feature some interesting characters, ranging from, obviously we've already mentioned about this before, there's Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, but there's also a new character which is actually introduced in this Sonic Boom series, known as Styx the Badger. Which, I remember back in Journey forms have been around a decade ago, that I was assuming about the fact that the actual series teased ourselves when it comes to able to bring back the familiar character for the sake of Sonic Rush Adventure, which appears to be Marina Raccoon, which thankfully it isn't, so instead we're able to actually have ourselves Styx the Badger, which I will say, Styx the Badger is actually a pretty cool character for the sake of the forms of the introductioning, for the sake of the forms of the Sonic Boom franchise, although relatively speaking I was about the fact that it's kind of unfortunate for the sake of the forms of this game in particular, that she's not a playable character in Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric, whilst compared to the forms of how it does it on other games, ranging from Sonic Boom Shadow Crystal, where she did become playable in that game, alongside with the forms of Sonic Boom Fire and Ice, and on top of that, there was also Mario and Sonic at the Rio 2016 Olympic Games, for the Wii U and the 3DS version, and finally, most notably, Sonic-2, Sonic Boom. So, yeah, as a result, no matter what though, I think that was the only time you can able to actually play as Styx the Badger when it comes to certain Sonic games, I'm pretty sure. Although, technically speaking though, Sonic, is about the fact that you did somehow already tackle through Sonic Frontiers, didn't you? Oh yeah, because you did somehow mention Styx the Badger's name in the actual ending conclusion of Sonic Frontiers, either on the forms of in the base game or the Final Horizons DLC update. So, anyway, so once you do manage to complete certain objectives right here, basically though you can able to actually unlock the power glyph, where basically though you can able to actually just to equip the item you want to choose. Like for instance, we did somehow equip the forms of the ground pound power glyph, which basically it gives us some a lot more powerful strength when it comes to able to try to perform ground pounds and stuff like that. So yeah, pretty self-explanatory right here. Now as far as I'm aware, is that with that particular pillar is now usually shining right here, basically that allows us to able to actually do some even more upgrades. So, but then again though, we'll show this off in Turing at some point for later, because for now, since we somehow meet again with the forms of Cliff right here, now, I don't suppose if you noticed, but we're basically going to be talking over, for the sake of the forms of the in-game cutscenes, specifically with the forms of this horrible lip-syncing, as well as the forms of some very weird animation plays out. So because of that though, whilst compared to the forms of how it does it on the proper cutscenes, then obviously though we don't feel like trying to able to talk out of it. So, but either way, so since we somehow managed to get ourselves the first Chaos Crystal, which by the way, what the actual plot is all about, for the sake of the forms of Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric actually plays out to be, basically though, is about the fact that the story involves around, or should I say, the storyline follows Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy, who must stop Lyric, the last agent, from acquiring the Chaos Crystals by powering up a robot army and whipping out all organic life after Sonic accidentally awakens Lyric from a 1000-year rest while escaping Dr. Eggman. So, yeah, that's as far as we can able to say about the forms of the premise of the actual plot of the game so far. But, I digress. So, as you can tell, we somehow activated the Wrecking Ball right here. So, naturally speaking, though, not only we can able to actually collect some more rings, but also we can able to actually grab the next crown. So, because of that, despite the fact that we've already maxed out our rings capacity right now, like, as you can tell, we've already maxed out up to 100 rings. So, no matter what, though, as I said before, the rings are used for health bar. So, because of that, though, every time you do get hit by enemy attacks, hazards, and all that stuff, you lose some bit of your rings. So, as a result, although there's actually a method you can able to actually upgrade your rings capacity by a maximum of 200 rings, but here's the catch though, is that you need to able to acquire the 3DS game of Sonic Boom Shadow Crystal, and that way you can able to actually have the ability to able to connect between both the Wii U game as well as the 3DS game. Something very similar to the forms of how it does it for both Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 3DS, alongside with Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U, for instance, except the fact that you can't able to actually use the 3DS as the controller in the forms of in Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U, which we rarely used it that much, mainly because we pretty much, you know, still more accustomed able to trying to play through the game with the actual superior Nintendo GameCube controller. Yeah, I will agree with you for this point, Sonic, especially concerning for the fact that it's kind of hard for me to able to go back onto Super Smash Bros. For the 3DS nowadays, especially concerning for the fact that obviously with the forms of the controller layout, just feels a bit, I don't know, kind of cramped here and there. Yeah, and especially noticeable about the fact that I'm probably not going to risk it too much to able to actually break my circle pad itself, especially concerning for the fact that if we are planning to do Super Mario 3D Land as far as the redo Let's Play is concerned, just before when, you know, a brand new 3D Mario game will be announced at some point, for the sake of the forms of the brand new Nintendo Switch successor or something. Well, again, we're not exactly sure what the name is going to be exactly, but then again, we'll find out more about it during at some point in the next couple of months or days, or in some cases, and during at some point in 2025. So, that's as far as I was expecting. So anyway, so we somehow placed the first Chaos Crystal somewhere on that particular podium, and that way we can now able to actually proceed into the next level. So, but here's the catch though, Amy, is about the fact that we need to do some bit of puzzles here and there. Like, for instance, I'm going to be able to perform a bit of a spin dash right there. So as a result, similar to the forms of how it does it in the spin dash ability for not only with Sonic Adventure, alongside with Sonic Adventure 2, except with the forms of Sonic Heroes, because in Sonic Heroes you're able to actually access to Rocket XL, not just by the forms of Sonic, but as well as the forms of Shadow, Amy, and Espio the Chameleon as well. But usually, relatively speaking, I was about the fact that when it comes to you know what I'm talking about with Sonic Adventure 1, Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow the Hedgehog, as well as Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, and on top of that with Sonic Lost World, and before the forms of Sonic Frontiers, thanks to the forms of that particular patch update, or specifically, one of the DLC updates, specifically with DLC free update number 2 with Sonic's Birthday Bash. So, you probably get the idea for that. So,
That should do it.
and basically that was about the fact that in order to able to activate the spin dash, you have to like hold down the X button, I'm pretty sure, and basically though you get yourselves a bit of burst of speed a little bit. So that's as far as the forms of the speed you can able to actually reach up to at this point. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that yeah, some people complain about the fact that this game in general is pretty much slower than the forms of how it does it in Sonic Lost World for both the Wii U and PC, even with the 3DS version as a matter of fact, despite the fact I'm still not a big fan of the 3DS version of Sonic Lost World, just because of this really dumb gimmicks they somehow introduced, and on top of that, the level lengths are pretty much a marathon of any sort. So, yeah, but that's besides the point. So, and also something tells me about the fact that the music in this game is not that very memorable to me anyway. Plus it's clearly because no matter what though, it sounds a little bit too generic for my taste. Although, relatively speaking I will say this right now, that Sonic 06 is definitely a little bit better than the forms of how it does it for this game does. Like, first of all, the music in Sonic 06 sounds way better than the forms of how it does it for this game to me though, because like I said before, the music in this game so far is way more generic as it seems, and it's also very, not that very memorable to me, and on top of that, it sounds super bland to me. So, whilst compared to the forms of how it does it on Sonic 06, I will say I love the entire soundtrack in Sonic 06, not only because it was catchy on certain stages, but it's also about the fact that it was actually super iconic, at least as far as I'm usually concerned, for the sake of the forms of trying to able to explore into, you know, certain stages, ranging from Kingdom Valley, Crisis City, White Acropolis, and you name the rest. Whilst compared to in here though, I did not seem to remember any of those memorable music in this game, aside from the fact that, as I said before, it sounds pretty generic and it's also very simplistic as well.
Yeah, I will agree for this point there, Sonic, which is especially noticeable that could be also applied to the forms of not only for Sonic Boom Shadow Crystal, but it's also with the forms of Sonic Boom Fire and Ice as well, just for the sake of the fact that we don't seem to remember the music all that much when it comes to the forms of the Sonic Boom games. Gee, no wonder why that certain Sonic Boom music never brought back, for the sake of the forms of the majority of the Super Smash Bros. Games, ranging from Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U, and most notably Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, but that's just mainly because it only focuses on the main Sonic games being made by not only with Sega, but as well as Sonic Team as well. Yeah, that's very understandable, so... Anyways, suffice to say, I think we should probably end things off at this point right here. Yeah, exactly. So join us next time for more of Let's Play of Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric. It's that we're about to be exploring onto the next location, which appears to be abandoned research facility. So, and hopefully we should be able to obtain the Sun Crystal. So we'll see you guys on Friday. Later, fellas.